let's go ahead and give shape 6 a try. And I want to start with this front face. And so let's go to Start New Sketch and make sure we select our front face. And if you look, this looks like a rectangle with a triangle on top. And so I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and I'm going to drag it out. It looks like the rectangle part of this shape has a height of 0.75 and a width of 1.5. And so I'll type in 0.75 for my height and hit tab on my keyboard and type in 1.5 for my width. And we have this fully constrained rectangle. And then I want to grab my line tool and add the triangle on top. And that's pretty simple. You just draw a triangle. And no, it's not perfect. We're going to make it perfect in just a second. So right click cancel. And so what do we know about this triangle? Well, the first thing we know is its height is 1.25. So I'm going to grab my dimension tool and I want to go from bottom to top and tell it to be 1.25 and hit enter. And if you notice, it's still not fully constrained. So I'm going to right click and hit cancel to get out of my dimension tool. And whenever it's not fully constrained, I like to click on it and see how it moves and see if I can figure out why. And it looks like it can still move from left to right. Well, that's because we didn't give this top point its width dimension of 0.75. So let me go to my dimension tool and select this top point to this edge and tell it to be 0.75. And we have this fully constrained sketch. I'm going to right click and hit cancel. And actually, let me use the trim tool real quick to cut out this line that doesn't actually exist. We don't need to, but it is a useful tool to understand how to use. So I'll go ahead and select that line to trim off. And I'll right click and hit cancel. And it just cuts off that edge. And if you notice, it did make this unconstrained. And so once again, if something's unconstrained, I like to click on it and see how it moves. And it looks like that unconstrained this as a rectangle, which means this line does not necessarily have the same height as this line. And I could add my dimension to it. I could tell this to be 0.75. But instead, I want to use my equal constraint. And I'm going to tell these two edges to be equal forever and always, which once again makes it a fully constrained sketch. So I'll right click and hit cancel and finish my sketch. And I want to extrude this shape, and it looks like it extrudes a depth of 2 inches. So I'll drag it out and type in 2 and hit enter on my keyboard. And it looks like we're almost done with this shape. We just need to add this sort of garage looking add-on to the side of our house looking shape. And so I'm going to go ahead and start a new sketch on this side face. I'll zoom in so I can see what I'm doing. And it looks like, once again, it's a rectangle mixed with a triangle on top. So I'll just grab my rectangle tool, and it looks like it's collinear with the bottom and the top of this face. So I'll just make sure I connect it to this edge and this bottom edge here. And it has 2 dimensions we still need to give it. We'll add those in a second. I'm going to right click and hit cancel. And I want to grab my line tool and add the triangle. And you might think, well, the triangle connects to the top, right, Mr. Anderson? And the answer is no. If you look, it doesn't actually make it all the way to the top. It doesn't actually intersect with this line. So I'm not going to go quite to the top. Instead, I'm just going to go somewhere in the middle and connect it to the other end, make sure it's coincident, and right click and hit cancel. And you might be thinking, well, Mr. Anderson, look over here, it's 1.25. It is the same height. And no, it's not. If you look very closely, that is 1.125. And so let's go ahead and add that dimension. We'll select our dimension tool and go from this point right here to the bottom and tell it to be 1.125. And hit enter. And so as you can see, it does not actually intersect with that line. Okay, so what else do we need to know? Well, we need to know the location of this edge right here. And if we compare it to this edge, we can see that from this edge to this edge is 0.5. So we'll type in 0.5 and hit enter. And so what about the location of this edge? Well, it tells us from this edge over here to this edge over here is exactly 1. And so we'll click between these 2 dimensions and type 1 and hit enter on our keyboard. And so what do we have left? Well, I'm going to right click and hit cancel to figure it out. And the answer is the width of this top triangular point. And we could have this dimension of 0.5. We could select this top point and this edge. But I want to show you there's another way we could figure that out. If I grab my equal constraint and I tell these 2 lines to be equal, Since this width is 1 and these two are always equal, that means the distance between this line and this center point would have to be 0.5 because math. And so you could add that 0.5 or you could do it this way. There's just more than one way to add your dimensions and fully constrain your sketch correctly. I'm going to right click and hit cancel and finish my sketch and go to my home view. And I want to extrude these two shapes. I didn't trim it this time, and that's okay. You don't have to because you could just select both of those shapes instead. And which way does it extrude? Well, if you look at it, it actually extrudes both directions. It's actually extruding in. It's not a cut. It is a join when it extrudes inward. But you can see it's clearly extruding into our shape. And we don't want to go too far because then it comes out the other end, and it's not coming out the other end, okay? So how do we make it go both directions? Well, I could just tell it to go one direction and then resketch it and go the other direction. But there's another trick we can do. We can go to our direction. Instead of going one side, we can go two sides. We can tell it to go two directions. And when we're going this way, I want it to be 0.5. But what about the other direction? Well, to select it, I just select the other arrow when I have two sides selected in direction, and I can drag it in, and I don't want it to go some distance. I actually want it to go all the way to the other shape into it, and then I can double check, okay, going this direction, it goes all the way into the shape, and going the first direction, it goes 0.5 inches, and that's what it is. And so I'm done with this extrusion. I'll hit OK. And we are therefore done with this shape. Let's go ahead and go to save and call it shape 6. And I'll double check that it is built in our data panel, and we are done with this shape.